It was late in the summer of 2014, and at the time I was living in Greenville, Mississippi. My dog Hank and I were taking a rest in the middle of our usual evening walk on a path through some thick trees when Hank's behavior changed for an unknown reason. He was sitting and looking around nervously with his tail tucked between his legs, which is weird for him. And then after sitting there in silence for a bit, he got up and started walking back towards the Mississippi River. I followed him for almost half a mile back in the direction from where we came, but he stopped abruptly and then stood trembling in fear by some trees that weren't too far away from the river. I urged him to come back to me, but he growled at me weakly as if he was trying to let me know to stay away and be careful. He was just a mutt, so I assumed that maybe this is just his usual fear, or he was afraid of the woods, or who knows what got him acting like this, but there was definitely fear in his face. "What is it, boy?" I asked him, looking around cautiously to see if anything had moved since he stopped. Nothing did, and all I could hear were the faint sounds of bugs chirping and frogs croaking in the distance. Sounds that always accompanied Mississippi nights in these parts. Hank was a great dog, and this was definitely unusual behavior for him, so I tried to call him back to me again. But when he refused to move closer despite my calls, I started walking slowly towards him and calling his name the whole way. And then his posture changed when he saw me finally reaching out for his collar, and he tried backing away from my grasp. "All right, buddy, come on, let's get you home," I said while trying to pull him along, but Hank was terrified now, not just afraid. And that's when the deep, low growling noise started, and it wasn't Hank. It was coming from the direction of the river, and it was low and very purposeful, like a warning almost. I let go of Hank's collar and took a few steps back in the direction that we had come from. Looking around slowly, I saw nothing at first, but then as soon as my eyes reached the dog sitting roughly 15 feet away, they fixed on it instantly, like some kind of instinct had taken over my body. It was just sitting there quietly with its head low to the ground, but then when it noticed me looking at it, it looked up and began growling steadily, that same growl that we had just heard, without taking its eyes off of me even for a second. I struggled to get my body to move backwards towards where Hank was standing, but before I could even take a step forward or backwards, this dog-like thing quickly stood up. My eyes grew wider as I watched it raise itself up. Ultimately, it stood what seemed to be about 7 feet tall, and I was paralyzed, and all I could do was stare at it. It started advancing slowly towards me with its head still low, but as soon as it took its first step, Hank began barking like crazy and lunging back and forth at the thing. This dogman immediately stood completely up on its hind legs and howled again before taking more steps towards us. And its dog-like head then fixed its gaze on Hank, and it was growling an ear-piercing growl that almost sounded human. Definitely not the way a dog would normally sound. It took about 10 long seconds before I could move again, but when I did, I hurriedly ran for Hank and grabbed him by the collar, pulling him away from where he was standing. Hank didn't want to leave, and I felt like he was trying to protect me from whatever this thing was. And that dog-like thing definitely looked like it wanted Hank, and obviously I wouldn't take any chances of that, so I grabbed him and ran towards home, running for about 10 minutes straight. And when we finally made it back to the neighborhood, Hank started wagging his tail and seemed to settle down a little bit. But then he suddenly stopped in the middle of the road as if he had seen or heard something. I looked around and didn't see anything, but Hank was persistent, so I knelt down beside him. He wasn't growling anymore, but his fur was raised on the back of his neck, and that's when I heard a sound coming from directly behind us. Directly behind us. Like someone or something was right there. Hank definitely heard it too, because he started barking loudly while trying to get away from me again. When I turned around, that dog-like thing had materialized itself right beside us on the road. It stood completely upright, towering over us, and we both froze in place as if some kind of a spell had been cast on us. We both looked up at it, and it looked back down at us. Its dog-like eyes were glowing and piercing. It was staring right through us like we weren't even there. And then Hank barked again, and that's when whatever this dog thing was really lunged at us, all in one quick movement. I felt the air rush by me as the dog thing took a big swing at me with its huge claw-like paw, but it missed by less than an inch, it seemed like. Hank didn't waste any time jumping into action by lunging to his left towards this dog creature. I turned to my right with tears in my eyes and saw Hank running towards it in full speed. I whistled as loudly as I could, which is my signal to Hank to return, and miraculously he stopped and came running back to me with his tail between his legs. Together we ran home and away from the creature, but the dog-like thing didn't give up this easily. It tried taking another swing at us from behind, and Hank avoided that blow by quickly turning midair while simultaneously running forward towards the house. We finally got home, and I immediately ran inside with the dogman not too far behind us. At this point, I was scared of being home alone, obviously, because I kept thinking that this creature could definitely enter our house just like it had reappeared on the road, like supernaturally or something. My dad was awake and came running towards my room, surprised to see me looking so scared. He asked if everything was okay and what had happened, but I couldn't answer. Instead, I tried catching my breath with tears running down my face. Finally, I was able to calm myself down and tell him exactly what had happened. He looked at me with a very serious look on his face and told me to tell him every detail. After I composed myself, we both went outside and walked around the neighborhood to look for this dogman creature that I had seen. We didn't find anything, but it was obvious to my dad that something had happened because there were dog tracks in the middle of the street where the dog creature appeared out of nowhere. I honestly think that my dad might have had this experience himself. He was acting strangely, like in a way that I had never seen before. He then said he would go talk to the neighbors, though, to see if anybody else had seen it. He talked to them the next day, but apparently nobody else did see anything. From that day on, I never let Hank leave my side. My dad was okay with that. Hank and I had both seen and experienced the dogman, so now we stick together 24/7. What I'm writing in to tell you took place in August of 2016 when my family and I were on vacation in Garrison, North Dakota. We had rented a small cabin next to a lake and basically hoped to get off the grid for a week. It was our third day there, and I looked at my watch. It was late, getting close to midnight, but I couldn't sleep. I needed some fresh air, so I got up and walked outside to the deck that overlooked the small pond on the property. It was pitch black out there, so with the help of the moonlight, I made my way across the deck. When I reached the end and looked out at the pond, something caught my eye out in front of me. At first, all I saw were two big yellow dots looking back at me, and then another set of eyes appeared next to them. Both sets were about 20 feet straight in front of me and looking directly at me. And then the next thing I saw was a dark, furry creature slowly revealing itself to me as I stepped out into the light from the porch. The second set of eyes stayed back in the darkness. And then the dog-like creature came forward and had long brown hair covering most of its body. It was about 7 feet tall and had a large head with a long, snoutish nose. It was brown in color with a white patch on its chest, just like a husky. And then the creature continued to look at and follow me as I moved further out into the deck. But then suddenly it went back into the blackness and joined the second creature. Well, I actually never did see that one at this point. I thought I must have been hallucinating or dreaming because I never believed in ghosts or monsters before now. Deep down, I felt something telling me that this dog thing was more than just an ordinary animal, and then I became super cautious. I slowly turned around and made my way back inside the house and locked all the doors. The next morning, I woke to some really weird sounds coming from outside, like around the bedroom window. It sounded like something was walking around on our wooden deck, making a lot of noise or growling and grunting at times. But then it stopped. I quickly got up from bed and looked out the sliding glass door and saw this dog-like creature on its hind legs looking into our bedroom window with these big yellow eyes staring right at me. Just like earlier, seeing this creature scared the hell out of me so badly that my heart started racing and I started feeling dizzy, almost as if somebody had injected some kind of adrenaline into me or something. I had to sit down on the closest chair, and then my wife woke up at the same time and asked me what was wrong. I couldn't answer because I didn't want to scare her by telling her I had seen a dog creature outside the window. I just told her that I had heard some animal outside making a lot of noise, but that it stopped. She looked really worried, and so did our kids when they came down the steps after hearing me tell the story. We decided to see if we could see it again and get a picture of whatever it was before we called the sheriff's department to come out and investigate. Our youngest daughter grabbed my wife's hand and said, "Daddy thinks there's something or somebody out there. I heard him tell you." I looked at her with a half smile and shook my head from side to side and told her that there was nothing out there. It was probably just my imagination playing tricks on me after watching the scary movies that I had watched on television. There was no way I was going to let anybody else outside with me, so they all stayed back inside. I was honestly scared to death, but I felt I needed to look for this thing to protect my family. A few minutes passed when all of a sudden I saw two big yellow eyes again out in the darkness. Before long, I saw the second set too. My youngest daughter was making weird sounds from inside the bedroom, and I swear I heard her saying that she saw 3 sets of eyes staring back. I quickly went back inside and told them to just lay down and stop looking out the window. I didn't want them to be so scared, and more so I didn't want them to see anything. "It's just your imagination," I told her. "Maybe we all just need to go back to bed and get some sleep." "No, Daddy, please, I don't want you to go outside," our youngest daughter said with tears in her eyes. I assured her I'd be fine, and I headed out the door. Everybody was watching me, I know, as I started walking towards the door that went out to the backyard. I slowly turned the lock on the sliding door and pressed my body against it as I opened it slowly, and I listened closely for any strange noises. There were none, so I stepped out onto the deck with a flashlight in one hand and my cell phone in the other, just in case I could see it and I wanted to get a picture. And that's when the creature stepped out of the darkness again. But this time it started walking straight towards me. It was definitely a dogman, but it didn't seem to pay much attention to me at first until it walked right past me. It smelled me first as I stood there frozen with fear, not knowing what to do, but then it stopped and turned around. It looked at me really closely up and down and growled. It was so loud and so scary that our dog inside started to bark too. I knew I had to get away from there as fast as possible, and I ran back inside through the sliding glass door, locked it behind me, and went upstairs to check on my wife and daughters. My own dog quickly followed me up the steps, also looking scared. I looked out their bedroom window once more, trying to see if this creature was still out there, but I didn't see it anywhere in the backyard or near the fence where I had seen it last. But I could now see that there were plenty of dog prints out in the yard, just outside our bedroom window, where this thing must have stood staring at us. I knew I needed to do something to get rid of it, so I went back downstairs, and this time I took a loaded shotgun with me just in case it charged me. To be honest, I didn't have an exact plan in mind, but I certainly felt safer holding that shotgun. I opened the door again and slowly started walking towards where I had seen this dogman, but it was nowhere to be found. So I kept walking until I got near the dog prints, and that's when I saw it again. It seemed like a dog at first glance, but it wasn't really quite right. It was so large and had dark grayish brown fur that reminded me of the ugliest dog I'd ever seen. I stopped dead in my tracks and pointed my shotgun directly at it and clicked off the safety as he turned around and growled at me and stared deep into my soul, it seemed like. It felt like forever, and then he slowly started approaching me. I don't even think he knew what the gun was, and that's when I took one shot in the air above him, hoping he would take off. I didn't want to kill him, and I was pretty sure it was just scared and confused. At least that's what I hoped. But this dogman thing didn't even flinch when the gun went off. It kept coming towards me and growling so low now that it sounded like a freight train rumbling past me. And then all of a sudden it started running towards me as fast as it could. In a flash, and to my surprise, it charged right past me. I spun around to see where it was headed, and I realized it was charging straight for my dog. It was still in the house, barking like crazy. And what happened next caught me totally by surprise. The creature thing stopped mid-run and did a 180 and took off in the opposite direction, running faster than I've ever seen anything run. I kept watching as it ran off into the distance until it disappeared. I slowly turned back to my dog, who was still barking like crazy inside the house. I went inside without saying a word, locked all the doors, and called the police. Because I just knew that this creature thing could and probably would come back again sooner or later. When the police arrived 20 minutes later, we told them everything that had happened. They took a report, but I honestly felt that they didn't believe a word I said. And once they left, they said they would go write up the report and be in touch with any questions. That's when we hunkered down for the night, hoping that we would not hear from that thing again. In the morning, we packed up and left.